Death has a lot of faces. Many you already know. The Grim Reaper, Hades, Santa Muerte, Anubis, Anku, Yama, the Black Dog. But most of these are also not death. They might facilitate the process, oversee the underworld, herald the end, escort you to the next life, but they themselves are not death. Because, of course, death is a process, not a person, which means that these are all really just metaphors and explanations for it. But what if death were a person? The process itself, incarnate with feelings and opinions and preferences? What would death be like? What do you hope death would be like? Sadly, you may never know the answer to that question, but over the years, a great many authors and artists have created the next best thing. Over and over, we see them taking death itself and turning it into a character. Okay, normally we put a little sponsor plug right here. This is where I mention it in passing, so you're not surprised when it comes up later. But this time is very different. Our sponsor for this video isn't trying to sell you anything at all. Not even sort of. They're a non-profit organization called 80,000 Hours, and their entire mission is to help you find the most meaningful, most fulfilling career you possibly can. They've done loads of research for you. They've made guides, podcasts, job listings, everything you could want, all entirely for free, because they believe that when people are doing things that actually matter to them, things that make a real difference in the world becomes a better place far faster. It's still kind of hard to wrap my head around the fact that they're literally paying us to help you get access to this free tool that could change your entire life. But there it is. What a weird, wonderful thing. Please, take this opportunity. Who knows when it will come again? Visit 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry to get started. Okay, so who would death be? What would they be like? I think for most of us, the most obvious personality would be a very cruel one. It is, after all, the ultimate source of human suffering. I think it's quite natural to envision death as someone sadistic and malevolent who revels in the agony they leave in their wake. I mean, death has never missed an appointment so far. It only follows that they probably love their job. Is it any wonder that death itself is so often depicted as a ghoul, a skeleton, a zombie, a gaunt, pale figure? If death is a thing to be feared, shouldn't it look and act that way? John Milton certainly seemed to think so. In his 17th century epic poem Paradise Lost, he describes what I would call a quintessentially evil death. The figure only appears in the work briefly, but in that short span, we see nothing in him but aggression, malice, and debauchery. In the poem, Death is the incestuous child of Sin and Satan, whom Milton sort of sets up as father and daughter. Anyway, after Adam's transgression in the Garden of Eden, Death leaves hell with Sin in order to spread their gifts on earth, that is, suffering and evil. In more concrete terms, Death literally goes around with darts and arrows and has a great old time flinging them at people. Also, just like his dad, at some point he and Sin copulate. And that's how the Hellhounds are conceived, forever barking inside Sin's womb. Like I said, quintessentially evil, almost the poster child for a malevolent death. But it's also a bit removed, right? This is technically an incarnation of death, and I think we can assume it has feelings, opinions, preferences, but he's also pretty one-dimensional, isn't he? Dangerously close to just being a symbol or a metaphor, like so many of the mythological depictions. But what would it look like to depict death as both cruel and extremely intimate at the same time? Last year, a movie came out that shocked me. I never expected to even get passingly philosophical about an entry into the Shrek franchise, let alone in a video about death, but here we are and here I go. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish does some incredible things with its characters. One of its most interesting characters by far is a hulking white wolf in a black robe, a mysterious bounty hunter who stalks the protagonist throughout the movie. Of course, we eventually find out that this is death itself coming to claim our hero's ninth and final life. Where Milton's death is cruel in a general sense, the bounty hunter in this movie is a deeply personal character. He literally engages in physical combat with the hero, even though he could very clearly overpower just about anyone he chooses. It's like he takes pleasure in the chase, enjoys toying with his victims before claiming them. This is a death who wants you to fear him, and does an excellent job inspiring that emotion in even the bravest hearts. Cruel as both of those examples may be, it's also interesting how directed their cruelty seems to be. Okay, maybe not Milton's death, that guy just seems nasty, but Puss in Boots' version seems more like a lesson about human hubris in the face of their all-but-guaranteed demise, which makes it almost sentimental? I mean, as horrifying as it is to think of death as this malevolent character who will hunt you down and toy with your mortality, I think it might also be scarier if it just didn't care at all. I mean, isn't it a bit presumptuous to think that if death were a person, they would even have the time to consider any particular one of the more than 100,000 human lives that wink out every day? Death is a force of nature. Maybe even cruelty seems a bit beneath it somehow. If anything, shouldn't we expect death to be kind of ambivalent? To be honest, I think you actually kind of already do. In fact, I think this characterization is even more common than the malevolent one. I mean, even the version of death that shows up in the massively popular TV show Supernatural can pretty much be described this way, comparing humanity to a mere bacterium, not out of disdain, but merely to create a sense of scale. And really, what is a single mortal life to death? In fact, outside of a preoccupation against the vastness of death, what is mortal life? Period. In the 2008 movie Hellboy 2, there's a scene where, after the hero is mortally wounded, his lover approaches the Angel of Death himself to ask for help. And honestly, kind of an alright guy. He says that he can in fact help, but there's a catch. The hero, he says, is fated to bring about the end of the world. So, the final choice is up to her. Let this angel claim the one she loves, or spare him and sacrifice everyone else. I think this is where that ambivalent quality becomes really interesting. Yes, this personification does allow the hero to live, but he does it knowing full well what it will cost the rest of the world. 1 life, 1 billion lives. In the end, it seems to make no difference to him. In his own words,
"It is all the same to me. My heart is filled with dust and sand."
You could probably guess by its apparent popularity, but this detached, couldn't-care-less version of death is also not particularly novel. We've been seeing these divested, impersonal, almost apathetic characterizations of death in media since at least the 50s, and probably much earlier. The 1957 film The Seventh Seal features what is probably the most iconic example of this ever. You'll recognize the imagery immediately. The movie follows a disillusioned knight after the Crusades. When he sees death approaching, he challenges the apparition to a game of chess. If he wins, death will leave him be. If he loses, well, we can guess. But, amused, death assures him that he cannot win and that there is no escape. But, amused, he agrees to play along. The game lasts several sessions, between which the two find ways to manipulate and deceive each other into losing. Death makes illegal moves. The hero knocks over the chessboard by accident. In the end, as Death promised, there was never any hope for the knight, and Death, at last, checkmates his victim. Although, while Death is distracted, 3 other would-be victims are able to use the opportunity to escape, which, for a knight freshly returned from the Crusades with a load of guilt on his conscience, makes the whole game worth it. It seems almost intuitive to imagine Death as an ambivalent character like this. It just seems to fit, because in reality, death doesn't really have a bias. It's just a thing that happens. It doesn't differentiate between the value of 1 or 1 billion lives, doesn't regard you as any more or less significant than the bacterium on your tissue, doesn't even take its job seriously enough to ensure that every single would-be victim gets caught. I think the interesting underlying idea here is that if mortals don't matter very much, then death doesn't matter very much, does it? And in that, there's also something wonderfully, bizarrely endearing, almost human, to imagine that death, the thing that will kill you, is also happy to make a little deal with you, or even sit down for a nice game of chess. Imagine how it would feel for death to do these things not out of apathy or a sense that it just doesn't matter very much, but instead because they genuinely want to. Imagine characterizing death not as someone malevolent or ambivalent, but benevolent, kind, with a genuine love in their heart for the creatures that they must also, in the end, kill. It's kind of a striking, subversive visual, isn't it? Unsurprisingly, it also describes some of the most beloved characterizations of death ever. I'll start with one of the more concrete examples of this, Death from Neil Gaiman's legendary graphic novel series, The Sandman. In the story, she's one of the Endless, a sort of godlike family of incarnations, each embodying a different aspect of human experience. She's distinct from her siblings, and pretty much every other version of Death in this video, in that she's oddly personable and, female, not for nothing. She takes the shape of a friendly, young, conversational goth woman. Frankly, you're far more likely to find her having a conversation in the park than doing anything even remotely Reaper-like. She takes care to meet every soul that enters this world, not only when they die, but when they're first born as well. She doesn't really come to collect your soul so much like the others. She more comes to visit, like an old friend. She is the voice of reason to her brother Dream and a tender companion to all mortals. She is still Death, of course. She still has a job to do, but who said she can't be compassionate about it? Okay, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you probably saw this coming a mile off, but there's no way I'm going to mention Neil Gaiman's version of Death in this video without talking about Terry Pratchett's too. His series Discworld has maybe the single most beloved characterization of death ever, and for very good reason. Discworld is a series famous for its satire and comedy, and early on, Death's role was no different, more of a parody than anything else. But over time, the character evolved into something very special. He has all sorts of quirks and interests. He's fond of cats and curry, and occasionally smoking his pipe. On one occasion, he filled in for the role of Discworld's version of Santa Claus. He's been known to meddle in mortal affairs in ways that displease the cosmos. But more than anything, as you read the books, it becomes clear that Death is absolutely fascinated by humanity. This reaches something of a climax in the book Reaperman when his affection for humanity begins to affect his personality. Realizing that he's started to care, he's sent by the auditors of reality to live as a mortal while they look for his replacement. In the end, however, after much havoc, he eventually returns to his rightful place, and in the process, he makes an incredible point. All things that are ours, but we must care. For if we do not care, we do not exist. If we do not exist, then there is nothing but blind oblivion, and even oblivion must end someday. What can the harvest hope for, if not for the care of the Reaperman? I think part of the reason authors seem to enjoy not only personifying but lending character to death like this is because it's such an unknown. To turn it into something interactive and conscious, whether malevolent, ambivalent, or benevolent, makes it feel more approachable, something you can talk to, listen to, understand to some extent. It makes death feel like something emotional and intentional, rather than some cosmic accident that is bound to befall every single person you ever met. Is it any wonder then that the benevolent characterizations of death are so well loved? There is no way to stop the hurt. Death is not nice. It never will be. But maybe it helps in some small way to think that if death itself had thoughts and feelings about the whole ordeal, they would at least treat you kindly. In his book, The Art of Discworld, Terry Pratchett says he'd sometimes get letters from terminally ill fans saying that they hope his books got death right. It may just be fiction, but it's a helpful thought. Much easier to love a version of death who loves you. In part, I think that's because death is a function of life as well. Just as the end of the story completes the narrative arc for the foreseeable future, death completes the human experience, and we all want our stories to be worth telling. Unfortunately, for you humans, it can be kind of hard to feel like that's the case. Did you know that most people spend about 80,000 hours of their life just working? Doing tasks to get money to pay for the things they need. Don't you wish sometimes that you could just get out of that grind? Spend that time to make a difference in the world? There has to be a way to work your career, earn your bread, and feel like your existence is meaningful at the same time, right? A better way to spend those 80,000 hours? Well, I'm here to tell you that there is, and this is barely a sponsor spot because there's no sell, no product, nothing at all for you to spend your money on. This really is me purely telling you that there's a way to make a real impact on the world and that you really can find work that will allow you to create legitimate change. There are incredible, meaningful jobs out there that you may never even have thought of, and you don't have to go find them on your own or chance upon them, because today, our sponsor is ready to help you. Let me introduce you to 80,000 Hours, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping you make the most of your 80,000 career hours. They've been doing this for over 10 years, have already helped over 1,000 people find their calling, and have so many resources just waiting for you to lay hold of. With the help of hundreds of experts and academic organizations, they've studied tirelessly to figure out what career paths stand to make the biggest impact on the world, and they've laid out paths to access them as well. Turns out you don't have to be a doctor or a teacher or a charity worker to change lives. Maybe you want to be an AI safety advisor, working in a lab and making sure the robots don't get out of hand. Or maybe you want to make a career out of addressing climate change. No shortage of hands needed there. And if you're still trying to figure out what issues matter most to you personally, where you want to spend your time trying to make an impact, the website is loaded with educational materials as well. From a free guide that they give you right on the landing page of the website, to an incredibly good podcast where they interview experts from every field, to one-on-one calls with impartial advisors who can help you find some career directions that you find promising, this site, it's built to change your life. And I can't stress enough that literally everything they offer is free. Visit 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry to get started. An absolutely massive thanks to them for giving us the opportunity to tell you about this thing that they've created for you. Definitely one of the coolest sponsors we've had on the show. I really hope you'll give it a look. Again, that's 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry. Imagine reclaiming 80,000 hours of your life, turning all that time from mindless labor just to put food on the table to something you feel passionate about, something that changes the world. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye.